The glass slipped from my hand as the microphone echoed through the crystal-lit room. "Sorry, Sabrina. This seat is for real family only." My foster sister Lillian's voice was soft as wind but cut like a blade. Laughter burst around me, glasses clinking. A waiter quietly set a bill before me, $3,800. For a few seconds, the room held its breath, broken only by the sound of my pen trembling across the receipt. No one knew that the moment I stood and left the table was the moment part of me died and another part began to wake. At the far end of the room, an older woman with silver hair watched me without blinking. That gaze, calm but razor-sharp, would later change my life forever. That night, drizzle clung to the windows, raindrops clinging to the windows, reflecting the yellow light from the living room. Outside, the maple tree shed its leaves in slow cascades, each one hitting the wet bricks with a sound like sighs. Inside, the air was so heavy I was afraid even to breathe. I sat by the dining table, waiting for them to come home. Foster mother Diane entered first, her dark coat draped loosely over her shoulders, rain still glistening on her curled hair. Behind her, Lillian laughed, holding a gift bag from some store in the Pearl District. I wanted to ask them about the documents I had received, an envelope with no return address, only a faint italic line in the corner, "For Sabrina, in case you ever doubt the truth." I placed the envelope on the table beside a cup of cold tea. "What's this?" Diane asked, slipping off her gloves and glancing at me sideways. I got it this afternoon. Someone sent it. No address. Inside were some statements. With my name. "What kind of statements?" Lillian cut in, the smile still on her lips but her eyes suddenly sharp. I slid the envelope toward them. Diane pulled out the first page, skimmed it, and frowned. "A prank," she said, voice cool and flat. "There are scams like this everywhere. Someone wants money or attention. Don't bother with it." But her hand trembled slightly as she folded the paper. I saw it. Lillian leaned forward to peek, her eyes flicking down to the bold line. "Sabrina Whitmore Trust Establishment. Year 2003 beneficiary. Minor, age 4. I heard my heartbeat echoing in the frozen air. "I don't think this is a prank, Mother," I said slowly. "It has signatures, my parents' signatures." "Your biological parents?" Diane's voice rose. "You should remember who raised you, who gave you everything." I lowered my eyes, not wanting them to see my hands shaking. "I want to understand why my name is on that account, if they really left something for me." "Enough, Sabrina." Lillian's tone sliced like ice. "You should be grateful instead of digging up the past. Don't forget, without us, you'd have nothing." I wanted to speak, but the words caught in my throat. Something shattered silently in the air, like a glass cracking from within. Diane grabbed the envelope, gathered all the papers, and threw them into the fireplace. Flames flared, casting a glow over her face, serene, almost terrifying. "From now on, never mention this again," she said. "There's no room for delusion in this family." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the rain fall from the eaves, each drop breaking apart like my own heart. I replayed everything they'd said over the years, words I once thought were lessons, but now reeked of power and disdain. "Don't ask for too much, Sabrina. Remember where you came from. Lillian's the one worth investing in. You study well, but you're still the adopted girl." I'd memorized those lines like a twisted lullaby from a house that was never truly home. The next morning, I arrived at work earlier than usual. I was an assistant accountant at a small architecture firm downtown, a job that paid the bills but couldn't quiet my mind. Checking my email, I saw a strange message in the spam folder. "If you want to know why they're afraid of you learning the truth, come to this address. Don't bring anyone." It was the coordinates of an old cafe in Selwood. Part of me was wary. Another part was burning with curiosity. At noon, I took the rest of the day off. It was still raining, but I went anyway. The cafe sat tucked between two antique shops, its windows fogged with condensation. I pushed the door open. A small bell chimed. The scent of roasted beans and old wood wrapped around me warm, almost comforting. In the corner sat a silver-haired woman in a gray coat, poised and elegant. She looked up and smiled faintly. Sabrina Caldwell? I nodded. Sit down, dear. I'm Eleanor Whitmore. I remembered the gaze from that dinner, calm yet piercing. Now it was closer, deeper. You received the envelope? She asked. Yes. But I don't understand why my name was in it. Because it belongs to you. That money was left by your biological parents, through a trust fund established right after they died in the accident in 2003. But I was told they left nothing. My foster mother said, Diane said. Eleanor interrupted, voice low. And she lied. More than once. I searched her face, looking for even a hint of deception. She reached into her handbag and slid a thin folder toward me. I used to be a financial advisor for Caldwell Industries. When your name appeared in hidden transactions, I grew suspicious. I traced everything. And I discovered the money was drained completely within the first 3 years after they adopted you. My hands turned cold. I picked up the first document, a bank statement, clear and official. Withdrawal, $50,000. Recipient, Diane Caldwell. Payment, private tuition, Lillian Caldwell. Transfer, renovation Caldwell Mansion. I couldn't speak. Even breathing hurt. Eleanor's eyes softened. You don't have to answer. I know what it feels like when your world suddenly flips. You said, you know? I whispered. I was deceived by them too. Years ago, I believed the funds were being used for your care, but when they sold the company, all records vanished. I stayed silent for lack of proof, until I saw you being humiliated at that dinner. When they did that, I knew silence had to end. I don't know whether to thank you or be afraid, I murmured. There's one thing you must understand, Eleanor replied. Justice doesn't come on its own. Someone has to go after it. She pulled out a business card. When you're ready, call this man. He'll help you uncover everything. I held the card, Mason Reed, attorney at law. Along the edge, a handwritten note read, Trust me, Sabrina. They stole more than money. Outside, the rain had eased, but the wet pavement still reflected the streetlights like shattered mirrors. I stepped out, cold wind brushing my face. Inside me, everything was still chaos, fear, doubt, fury, but beneath it all, a small flame began to burn, quiet yet unwavering. Twilight over Lake Oswego was eerily calm. The lake spread flat as glass, mirroring the gray sky and drooping branches that seemed to hide unspoken secrets. I stopped my car before a small wooden house perched on a gentle slope. A worn bronze plaque on the gate read, Eleanor Whitmore. The door opened before I could knock. She stood there tall, slender, silver hair neatly pinned, eyes bright with both compassion and caution. I knew you'd come eventually, she said, her tone steady and warm. Inside, the house smelled of wood and herbal tea. Black and white photographs lined the walls, a young woman standing before an old building, her expression hauntingly familiar. Sit down, Sabrina, she said. I didn't want this discussed over the phone. Some truths must be seen, not heard. She placed a thick folder tied with red string in front of me. The rustle of papers sounded like a confession. These are the bank records, she explained. $400,000, deposited into a trust fund named Sabrina Whitmore Trust, created by your biological parents. Purpose, your care and education until you turn 21. She looked up, gauging my reaction. My throat burned dry. The numbers on the page carved into my mind like blades. Withdrawal $50,000, recipient, Diane Caldwell. Transfer $75,000, purpose, renovation of Caldwell Estate. Payment $30,000, tuition, Lillian Caldwell. The Caldwells drained it all within 3 years, Eleanor said softly. Not a single cent was spent on you. I tried to steady my breathing, but the hand resting on the table wouldn't stop shaking. It can't be, they said, that they adopted you out of kindness? She gave a faint smile, as sad as a passing breeze. Diane once came to me, asking for my signature on expense verification papers. Back then, I believed they were doing the right thing. I signed without question. But a few years later, when Caldwell Industries started transferring funds into personal accounts, I realized how wrong I'd been. She opened another folder older, the paper yellowed with time. This is a copy of your adoption record. They used a forged county seal. The guardian's signature isn't real. Everything was fabricated to legitimize their control over your assets. I looked at the document and saw the name Sabrina Whitmore written in fine, careful script. Beneath it, a round stamp blurred at the edges. You were robbed of your identity, she said, each word deliberate. Not your money, but your right to exist under your own name. Why are you helping me? Eleanor spoke slowly. Because I've stayed silent for far too long. She walked to a glass cabinet in the corner and took out a small framed photograph. In it, a young couple held a newborn baby. The woman's gentle smile and bright eyes looked uncannily like mine. This is your mother, Eleanor said softly. Her name was Margaret Whitmore. She was my sister. I heard my heart beat heavy, one thud at a time. Your sister? Yes. She and her husband died in the accident in 2003. I was abroad then. By the time I returned, Diane had already adopted you. I thought it was the best thing that could happen. I didn't know I was handing you to someone who knew how to turn affection into chains. I shook my head slightly, unsure what to believe anymore. If everything you say is true, why didn't you speak sooner? Eleanor looked out the window. The pale light of late afternoon cast sharp lines across her face. Because I had no proof. All the originals were locked inside Caldwell Industries' vault. I only recovered copies recently, thanks to someone who used to work at the bank. But now it's different. Now I have you. And you have the right to know the truth. I bowed my head, trying to hide the tears welling up. Everything inside me collapsed and cleared all at once. I remembered the quiet dinners when Diane told me to sit at the end of the table. I remembered Lillian showing off a new dress bought with the parent card. I remembered Victor, my foster father, avoiding my eyes whenever tuition was mentioned. They hadn't seen me as a burden. To them, I was a living debt. Eleanor stepped closer, resting a hand on my shoulder. I know it's hard to accept, but if you want to restore your parents' honor, I'll stand with you. They won't let this go. They have money, connections, lawyers. Did you forget? She smiled faintly. They only have power because I used to fear them. Not anymore. She pulled open a drawer and took out a thick envelope sealed with red wax. Inside are the transaction lists and Diane's signatures. I kept a copy, in case. You should take this to Mason Reed, the lawyer I mentioned. He's trustworthy. You believe I can do this? Eleanor looked straight into my eyes. It's not belief, it's certainty. Because in your eyes, I see what once lived in Margaret's, that resolve people have when they've got nothing left to lose. She turned back toward the window, where the lake reflected the changing sky, the sunset bleeding out like a red wound. But Sabrina, she said, her voice lowering, you must be ready. This truth won't just make them angry. It could drive them desperate enough to destroy anyone who carries it. A gust of wind swept through, carrying the scent of cold water and dried lavender. I looked out at the lake, the ripples calm, suspiciously so. A vague feeling stirred in me that everything was only beginning. I took the envelope, my heart heavy but my steps steady. The door closed softly behind me, the hinge creaking like the final period of a life buried in silence and the opening of another, where I'd have to face everything they'd tried to hide. On the drive back, the sky darkened. Streetlights stretched long shadows over the wet road, like strands of memory connecting past and present. I rolled down the window, letting the cold wind lash my face. In the rearview mirror, Eleanor's house grew smaller until it dissolved into the night, and I realized, whether afraid or uncertain, there was no turning back. Early autumn air bit at my throat, sharp enough to turn breath into mist. I sat in a cafe on the corner of Burnside, both hands wrapped around a cappuccino that had long gone cold. The dim afternoon light filtered through the fogged glass, reflecting my own face, pale, tense, and worn from sleepless nights. Mason arrived a few minutes late. He took off his hat, brushed rain from his coat, and sat across from me. His eyes were shadowed, as though he hadn't slept much either. We've got a bigger problem than I thought, he said, voice low. I figured. I tried to sound steady, though my hands clenched tight in my lap. Did you find anything? Mason opened his bag and pulled out a thick, carefully clipped file. Lines of numbers, transaction codes, bank names. I didn't understand them all, but I could see Caldwell Industries repeating over and over. This is their intermediary account, he explained. Money from your trust fund was withdrawn, then funneled through 7 shell companies. Most of it was used to launder Caldwell Industries' dark funds. Are you sure? Positive. I worked there long enough to recognize their signature moves. And, Sabrina, it looks like this isn't about money. He slid a faded photograph toward me. In it, Diane and Victor, my foster parents, sat in a private meeting with several unfamiliar men. The photo had been taken from afar, through glass, but clear enough to see a file with my name on it lying on the table. This meeting took place 3 months ago, right around the time you got your first envelope, Mason said. Someone knew what was coming. They were getting ready. I stared at the picture for a long time. Under the cafe's neon light, Diane's polite smile remained intact, but her eyes were hollow. I remembered that look, the same one that haunted my childhood, sweet and threatening at once, like a velvet-covered blade. You think they know I'm investigating? Probably. I've noticed a black SUV tailing me from the office to my house twice this week. I shivered. And you still came to meet me? Mason shrugged. If they're watching, at least we know they're scared. He paused, his tone softening. But you need to be careful. These people protect their reputation. And reputation, to someone like the Caldwells, is worth more than life. I looked out the window, headlights flickering across the wet street. In my mind, Eleanor's words and Diane's lies twisted together into a storm I couldn't escape. So, what's next? I asked. Mason pushed my cup slightly closer and gave a faint smile. We go after what they fear most, the original evidence. A copy of the transfer contract is stored in Caldwell Industries' internal data vault. I had temporary access back when I interned there. There might still be a way. Are you sure it's safe? No. But if we don't do this, you'll never break free from their circle. 2 nights later, I stood beside Mason outside the Caldwell Industries building. The 13th floor was still lit, unusual for a company that closed at 7 p.m. The data room's on the 8th floor, he whispered. We need the financial logs from 2010. They contain the first transfers from your trust fund. We entered using Mason's old keycard from his internship days. The door beeped softly, then clicked open. Inside, the hallway stretched silent and sterile, each step echoing in my chest. I never thought I'd return to the place that once symbolized my foster family's power, now the very ground where I'd reclaim my truth. The data room lay behind a frosted glass panel. Mason plugged a flash drive into the main server, typing rapidly. The screen came alive with lines of code. Looks like it's still active, he said. They never changed the internal password. I stood behind him, heart pounding. A message appeared. Access granted. He began the download. The hum of the server filled the air like someone's restrained breath. Suddenly, the hallway lights flickered. I jerked around. Mason, stay calm. Probably a motion sensor. But then came footsteps. Heavy, slow, steady. Someone was coming. Mason pulled out the flash drive and grabbed my hand, leading me toward the back door. It closed. As a shadow passed behind the glass, we ran across the parking lot, swallowed by the thick curtain of rain. In the car, Mason plugged the flash drive into his laptop. A single folder appeared, titled Archive, Whitmore. He opened it. Inside were hundreds of data files, statements, contracts, and, most damning of all, emails between Diane and Victor. I read those cold, calculated words, my hands trembling. We need to clean out the fund before the girl is old enough to access it. If Eleanor still has the originals, take care of it immediately. Another line read, Don't worry, she doesn't have much time left. That fund will vanish like it never existed. My throat tightened. They planned everything, even against Eleanor. Now you see why they're afraid, don't you? The next morning, the media exploded. On social networks, Photos of me at a grocery store spread everywhere. Red eyes, wrinkled shirt, exhausted face. The caption read, "Unstable woman accuses wealthy family of embezzlement." I knew Diane was behind it. Her voice came through the television, sweet and composed as ever. "We only want to help Sabrina, but she's deeply unstable. She needs treatment, not a courtroom." I turned off the TV, my hands shaking with fury. Outside, camera flashes burst through the window. Reporters crowded the street below. I shut the curtains, feeling trapped in the very apartment I paid for. The phone rang. It was Mason, his voice tense. "Sabrina, I think they know we took the data. Someone broke into my office this morning. Are you okay?" I got out in time. But my car, the brakes were cut. "They're sending a message." I gripped the phone tightly. "You have to call the police." "No. If I do, they'll spin it as an accident. Trust me, they've got people inside already. There's only one move left, we go public." His words echoed in my head, mixing with the sound of rain against the window. I looked around the small room that had once felt safe. Now it was a cage. A single thought crept in. If they dared do this to Mason, I would be next. That night, the sky over Lake Oswego looked painted in thick black velvet. The golden lights around the lake rippled on the water, trembling like they feared what was coming. From the living room window of Eleanor's mansion, I watched my reflection blur against the glass. The antique clock struck 7 as the iron gate opened outside. Tires crunched over gravel. The Caldwells had arrived. Diane entered first, carrying herself like a woman used to giving orders. A wine-colored coat, pearl bracelet at her wrist, a carefully practiced calm on her face. Behind her came Victor, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes tired but still bearing the sharpness of a man who once owned the world. Lillian was last, her heels sharp against the marble, her leather purse slamming against a chair with a dry clack, more like a declaration of war than the start of dinner. Eleanor sat at the head of the table. Her frame was frail but upright, her eyes as piercing as ever, though her hand trembled faintly when lifting the glass of water. I sat beside her, silent. The air felt thick, as if one whisper could shatter it. "Let's begin," Eleanor said, her voice low but steady. "Thank you for coming. I wanted a family dinner. Before I leave." Diane let out a small laugh. "Leave? Eleanor, you sound so dramatic. You look well, at least from here." Eleanor smiled faintly and turned to me. "Well? Stage 4 pancreatic cancer doesn't have that definition, Diane, but it does teach you how to choose what matters with the time you have left." The room fell silent. I saw Lillian glance sharply at her mother, demanding answers. Eleanor set down her glass, her words slow and heavy as stones dropping into water. "I've rewritten my will. All assets, shares, properties, including my remaining stock in Caldwell Industries, will go to Sabrina Caldwell." The sound of shattering calm tore through the room. Diane dropped her fork. Lillian shot to her feet, the chair screeching harshly against the floor. "What did you say?" "I think I was clear enough," Eleanor replied. Victor swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. "Eleanor, that's absurd. Sabrina is the only one who didn't build her life on lies," Eleanor cut in. "I know whose money you took, Victor. I know Diane forged documents, laundered funds through a child's inheritance. Don't think I didn't see." Diane gave a brittle laugh, trying to stay composed. "You've been manipulated by her, that girl. Or maybe the truth terrifies you?" Eleanor's tone stayed calm, but her eyes flashed like steel. Lillian slammed her palm on the table. "You have no right to destroy this family's reputation for some delusional foster child." I looked straight at her, my voice eerily calm. "If reputation has to be kept by hiding crimes, then it's not reputation, Lillian." Eleanor placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You don't need to argue, dear. They won't hear you anyway." She slowly took out a white envelope sealed with a notary's stamp. "This is a copy of the will. The original was filed with my lawyer this morning. Mason Reed will hold it." The room erupted, shouting, chairs scraping, voices clashing. Victor tried to steady a trembling Diane, while Lillian's face burned red. "You'll regret this. Every one of you will regret this," she screamed. Eleanor's reply was almost a whisper. "No, I've already regretted enough." Dinner ended in chaos. No one touched the main course, still steaming from the kitchen. One by one, they left heavy, venomous, like a storm gathering over the lake. When the last door closed, the room held its breath. I turned to her softly. "Are you all right?" "I am." Eleanor smiled faintly, though her face had gone pale. "Now I can finally breathe." I helped her upstairs, bringing a cup of hot ginger tea. She sat by the window, staring at the lake rippling under the moonlight. "Aren't you afraid they'll do something?" I asked. "I am," she said quietly. "But fear doesn't mean silence." Then she turned to me, taking my hand. "If I'm gone someday, Sabrina, remember, truth never disappears. It only gets buried. When it resurfaces, it sweeps everything away." There was something in her voice, in the way she looked at me, that made me feel something was coming. 2 days later, my phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Mason. His voice was hoarse, urgent. "Sabrina, Eleanor's missing." "What did you say?" "The housekeeper found the mansion open this morning. No signs of struggle, but her car's gone. Her phone, wallet, everything else is still there. Only one envelope left on her desk." "What was inside?" "Just one line. Don't trust anyone." I collapsed into a chair, my mind spinning. What did the police say? "They think she went somewhere to rest. But I don't buy it. Sabrina, I think someone got to her." That entire day, I couldn't function. Every sound felt distant: cars, rain, even my neighbor's voice through the wall. That afternoon, I drove straight to the mansion. It was silent, doors still open, as Mason said. Inside, the dining table still held Eleanor's half-finished glass of wine, the lipstick stain fresh on the rim. I touched it gently, my chest tightening. In her study, I found the envelope Mason had mentioned, plain white, neat handwriting. I picked it up, my palms cold. Beneath the desk, something glinted: a small key. I bent down to pick it up. The letters E.W. were engraved on its face. "Eleanor Whitmore." I called Mason, my voice shaking. "I found a key in her office. Can you send me a picture?" I took a photo and sent it. "I've seen that logo before," he said. "It's from a safety deposit box network downtown. She must have left something for you." Someone had vanished, but deep down, I knew she hadn't left out of fear. She was leading me toward the heart of the truth. News of Eleanor's disappearance spread across every local channel. The anchor's voice was steady, emotionless, like reading a verdict. 72-year-old Eleanor Whitmore has been missing since Friday night from her Lake Oswego residence. Police discovered her scarf near the west shore by the wooden bridge. The investigation is ongoing. They played the same clip repeatedly: Eleanor walking out of a charity building, her faint smile in the sunlight, unaware it would be the last image of her alive. A suffocating grief tightened my chest. But then the headline below made my blood run cold. "Sole heir, Sabrina Caldwell, now under police questioning." That afternoon, before sunset, there was a knock at my door. 3 officers stood there, their tone polite but their eyes already made up. "Miss Caldwell, we need you to come with us for questioning." I didn't resist. I knew any protest would only make things worse. Neighbors gathered on the porch, whispers mixing with camera clicks. A woman's voice rose somewhere. "That girl, isn't she the heir? Maybe." It was her. I lowered my head, not wanting anyone to see that the fear in my eyes had hardened into quiet rage. The Portland police station smelled of old paper and stale coffee. They asked the same questions again and again. "Where were you that night? Why can't anyone confirm you left the mansion with Eleanor? Do you know anything about the new inheritance?" I answered everyone, refusing to flinch, though each question cut like the same blade, reopening the same wound. After hours, they released me for now. But the next morning, Oregon's biggest newspaper ran a headline that took up the entire front page. "Adopted killer? Whitmore's sole heir, suspected of murdering foster mother for inheritance." A photo of me in handcuffs, eyes dim under police lights, flooded the internet. Strangers commented as if they'd been there, as if they knew me. Just greed. They're all the same. She was abandoned once, maybe she's still holding a grudge. People like that never love anyone. They only love money. I thought I was used to being judged, but no one ever really gets used to the humiliation of being falsely accused. 3 days later, they brought me back to the interrogation room. This time, not to question but to detain. "We need more time to clarify the facts," the officer said, his tone flat and rehearsed. The cell was small, gray walls stained with age, the fluorescent light flickering above. The clang of the metal door echoed long and cold. I sat on the steel bed, forcing my breath to steady. In my mind, Eleanor's image kept returning, her eyes from that last dinner, bright enough to feel prophetic. "Don't trust anyone in the dark," she had written. Now, the dark was everywhere. On the second night, as I lay awake, a whisper came from outside the bars. "Miss Sabrina Caldwell?" I sat up. A man in a guard's uniform stood half-shrouded in the flickering light. He slid his hand through the bars, voice low. "Someone sent you this." Something soft and heavy dropped onto my bed, an old sneaker. He left immediately without looking back. I glanced around. No one noticed. I picked up the shoe, turned it over, and felt beneath the insole. A small envelope was hidden there. I opened it. Inside was a pale blue flash drive, a strip of tape across it with the handwritten words, "For Sabrina." The next morning, when my lawyer Mason came to visit, I hid the drive in my palm and whispered, "I have this. You need to check it as soon as you leave." "Who gave it to you?" "I don't know. A guard. Maybe someone from Eleanor." "You're sure she's still alive?" "I'm not sure. But I believe she is." 2 days later, I was released temporarily, thanks to Mason's intervention. He said, "There's progress, but you should stay out of sight." I returned to my small apartment in the Pearl District. When the door closed, the empty room echoed with my own breath. I opened my laptop and plugged in the flash drive. A single folder appeared, EW. Inside was one video file. I clicked play. The image trembled slightly, Eleanor sitting at her desk, the light cutting across half her face. Her voice was hoarse, weak, but clear. "If you're watching this, it means I'm no longer free. I'm being watched, and they may act soon. The Caldwell family isn't greedy, they're criminals. I've kept all evidence in my safety deposit box at City West Bank, code name Blue Ledger. Open it, Sabrina. Trust no one except Mason." She paused, drawing a labored breath. "If I disappear, remember they'll try to destroy you, but the truth will be the one thing they can't bury." Eleanor's words echoed in my head. Blue Ledger. I pulled out my phone and texted Mason a single line. "I know where she's leading us." He replied with 3 words. "Stay safe, Sabrina." Eleanor had foreseen everything. She knew the end, knew they would erase her, knew I'd be accused, yet she still chose to fight. The glow from the screen lit her face in the video. Those eyes seemed to pierce through time, whispering to me again, "I believe in you." City West Bank stood at the corner of 2 quiet streets, where autumn maples were beginning to shed their leaves. That morning, Portland was veiled in a thin, smoky light that drifted through the windows and painted the pavement gold. I stood before the gray stone building, gripping the key so tightly that my palm felt as cold as the metal itself. Mason had recovered from the crash, his shoulder still bandaged, but insisted on coming with me. He said, voice still rough, "You're sure you want to open it yourself?" If this is what Eleanor wanted me to see, I have to be the first to look. Inside, the smell of polished wood and old paper mingled into something solemn, almost sacred. The blonde clerk with a name tag that read, "Marcy," gave us a cautious look before checking the files. When I handed her the key and the signed authorization Eleanor had left, her expression changed from curiosity to quiet astonishment. "Please wait here, Miss Caldwell," she said. "Mrs. Whitmore's box is stored in a private room. It requires 2 keys, one from you and one from the bank." We followed her down to the basement. The air was cool and dry, steel walls gleaming, our footsteps faint against the stone floor. Hundreds of safe deposit boxes lined the walls, each one a locked compartment of memory, everyone guarding their own secret. When Eleanor's box finally opened, the sound of the turning mechanism was deep and deliberate, like an old sigh being released. Marcy left us alone. I slid the metal case out of its slot and set it on the table. It was so heavy I needed both hands. Inside was a thick bundle of documents tied with a blue ribbon, a small black drive, and an envelope sealed with red wax. Mason said softly, "I'll handle the data. You should start with the papers." I untied the ribbon. One page after another, bank statements, transfer records, electronic signatures from Victor and Diane Caldwell. Each transaction marked, Orphan Fund Temporary Holding. I flipped through a few more pages. In the middle was a transcript marked, Voice log the 7th of March 2010, V. Caldwell and D. Caldwell. Mason inserted the black drive into his laptop. The screen lit up and their voices filled the room, echoing faintly. "We have to clear that account before the girl turns 18. You worry too much, Victor. She'll never find out. Every document is in our hands." "What about Eleanor? Let her talk all she wants. Who believes a dying woman living on painkillers?" Then came the man's cold chuckle, the sound of metal scraping. "If anyone asks, we say we adopted her out of kindness." Their voices, too real, too clear. Each word stabbed my ears like a needle. Mason paused the audio, his face torn between pity and rage. "I knew they were corrupt," he said, "but not like this." I took a deep breath, forcing my voice steady. "Play the rest." He broke the red seal on the envelope. Inside was another thinner, pale yellow, with handwritten words. "For Sabrina, when she's ready." My hands trembled as I opened it. A folded DNA test fell out, edges worn. I unfolded it slowly, hearing the faint tear of paper. My eyes stopped at the first line. Subject A, Sabrina Caldwell. Subject B, Eleanor Whitmore. Result, 99.98% maternal relationship confirmed. The room seemed to freeze. The hum of the air vent, my heartbeat, even my breath, everything merged into a heavy stillness. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The letters blurred, then cleared again, mocking my sanity. "No," I whispered. "That can't be." Mason stood silently. He knew there was nothing to say. I folded the paper, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Eleanor, my mother." The words filled my mind colder than any wind outside. Fragments of memory surfaced. Eleanor's hand holding mine at the press conference. Her proud, gentle eyes when she said, "I believe in you." The way she used to watch me a little longer than usual, as if searching for something lost. She knew from the beginning. She knew I was her daughter. And all these years, she'd stayed silent. I turned to Mason, my voice raw. "Did they force her to give me up?" Mason looked down at the paper, then nodded slightly. "If I had to guess, they did it to protect their reputation. If people knew Victor had a child with Eleanor, his career would have been over." I let out a faint laugh, humorless and hollow. Their reputation was built on burying me and my mother under layers of lies. Mason placed a hand on my shoulder. "Now you know why she wanted you to see all this." "All my life," I murmured. "I called the woman who gave birth to me by another name. And I called the one who destroyed her mother." Mason closed the box. "We have to go. They'll know you opened it soon." We left the bank. Mason opened the car door for me. I sat down, watching faces blur past the window, no one knowing my entire world had collapsed. He started the engine and asked softly, "Sabrina, what do you want to do now?" My lips parted, voice quiet but firm. "I want to know why she had to hide me, and why they wanted her gone." He understood those weren't questions. They were wounds, deep and old, and I didn't know yet where they would lead. The courtroom that morning was packed. White light from the ceiling reflected off gray marble floors, making everything both bright and cold. I sat in the front row beside Mason, a stack of documents before us, the red sealed envelope with Eleanor's signature resting on top, her final evidence. Across the aisle, the Caldwell family sat together. Diane in the middle, her blouse collar stiff, her face painted into expressionless perfection. Victor with arms crossed, eyes sharp with disdain. Lillian at the end, her face hollow, one trembling hand pressed to her mouth. Judge Morrison, a silver-haired woman, small but razor-eyed, entered, and the room fell silent. The gavel struck 3 times, crisp and final. The court is now in session. I gripped the lavender-scented handkerchief in my hand, the smell reminding me of Eleanor. Mason leaned closer, whispering enough for me to hear. Let me handle the heavy lifting. They'll expose themselves. The Caldwell's attorney stood first, a man with a velvet-smooth voice, each word laced with calculation. Your Honor, he began, the benefactor of Miss Sabrina Caldwell, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, passed away in frail health, easily influenced. In her final days, she was manipulated by Miss Caldwell, a woman with a history of psychological instability following her estrangement from her adoptive family. She fabricated a blood relation and forged documents to seize the Caldwell fortune. My chest tightened as I listened. Something cold and bitter rose in my throat, but Mason's hand pressed gently over mine, stopping me. Don't speak, he murmured. Let them tie their own noose. The opposing lawyer flipped open a folder, holding up several sheets. This is the DNA test Miss Caldwell submitted. But note, Your Honor, the laboratory that performed it is funded by the Eleanor Foundation. We question its impartiality. He turned toward me, smirking slightly. Miss Caldwell, would you like to comment on that? I looked at him, then at Diane. She avoided my eyes, but the corner of her mouth lifted faintly, that same cold smirk I'd seen before, the one that used to come with her words. We adopted you out of kindness, don't forget your debt. I have nothing more to say, I replied. The truth will speak for itself. Mason rose. Your Honor, we request to present our evidence. He opened his laptop and connected it to the large screen in the center of the room. The video appeared Eleanor, filmed before her disappearance. Her voice, rough but steady, filled the courtroom. If you're watching this, it means I am no longer free. I've stored evidence of Caldwell Industries in the safe labeled Blue Ledger. And Sabrina Caldwell, she is the daughter I gave birth to. Gasps filled the room. Diane turned pale, Victor slumped back, and Lillian bowed her head. Mason paused the video, then played the next recording, the one we'd found in the cutter. Safe. Victor's voice. We have to clear that account before the girl turns 18. Diane's voice. You worry too much, Victor. No one knows who she belongs to. As long as Eleanor stays quiet, everything will be fine. Judge Morrison looked directly at the Caldwells, her eyes cold as steel. Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, do you have any response to this recording? Victor stood, sweat glistening on his forehead. Lies. That's fabricated. We'll prove, Mason interrupted, his tone calm but sharp as a blade. This recording was extracted from the original hard drive, verified by the bank where the safe deposit box was stored. And there's one more detail. He opened another data file. On the screen appeared rows of financial statements, the words Orphan Trust Fund repeated over and over, each line a transaction. He pointed to the final number. This is the $400,000 that Caldwell Industries withdrew from the orphan account under the name Sabrina Caldwell. With interest and concealed transfers, the total amount embezzled reaches $830,000. Diane screamed, No! We raised her, fed her, educated her, that's fair compensation. The judge struck her gavel. Mrs. Caldwell, maintain order. Her face quivered, the layers of makeup no longer hiding the cracks beneath. Amid the crowded room, I could suddenly hear my heartbeat heavy, separate, steady. Then Morrison turned to Lillian. Miss Lillian Caldwell, do you have anything to say? She lowered her head, hands clenched tightly together. Tears fell, slow and heavy, as if they'd been waiting for years to surface. We knew, she whispered. My mother. She told us to stay quiet. She said if the truth came out, our family's reputation would be ruined. Mrs. Eleanor only wanted her daughter to reclaim her name, but her voice broke. We let her suffer. The air in the room shifted completely. Morrison nodded, her voice low. Thank you. That testimony will be recorded. Mason sat down and leaned toward me. Now they've nailed shut their own coffin. I looked toward the tall window where sunlight streamed through. In that moment, I felt Eleanor somewhere above, quietly watching. Judge Morrison organized the files, then spoke slowly, each word clear and resonant. After reviewing all submitted evidence, including the video recording, audio evidence, DNA results, and the voluntary statement of witness Lillian Caldwell, the court concludes that the will of Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore is valid. All assets, shares, and properties will be transferred to the sole legal heir, Miss Sabrina Caldwell. The gavel struck the bench with a thunderous sound. The Caldwell family is hereby charged with financial abuse and inheritance fraud. Diane shot up, screaming something incoherent before collapsing back into her chair. Victor bowed his head, shoulders trembling. Lillian sat frozen, tears streaming silently down her face. Camera flashes exploded, but the noise faded into distance. Mason placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice soft. Eleanor would be so proud. The courthouse doors opened, and the afternoon wind rushed in, carrying the scent of damp rain and the murmurs of the crowd outside. I walked forward, through the swarm of lenses, not hiding, not lowering my head. Each step echoed with the rhythm of my own heart, calm, steady, and free, for the first time after so many years living in someone else's shadow. The hospital sat on a hill south of the city, where the late autumn sunset draped itself like a thin silk ribbon over the fogged glass windows. I walked down the corridor, the sound of my shoes faint against the cool tiles. The scent of antiseptic mixed with dried lavender from a small vase at the reception desk reminded me of Eleanor's room, where she used to brew tea and tell me, "Quiet isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the only way to hear what we fear most." The door to her room was slightly open. Mason stood outside, leaning against the wall, his face drawn but his eyes calm. He said softly, "She's waiting for you. The doctor says she's more lucid today." When I stepped inside, the soft yellow light from the bedside lamp fell across Eleanor's face. She looked frail, her silver hair loose around the pillow, but her eyes still the same, bright, warm, full of strength. She looked at me, her lips trembling. "Sabrina." Her voice was raspy, but every word clear. I sat down and took her thin hand in mine. The veins stood out beneath her translucent skin, yet it felt warm as if every cold year had melted away in that moment. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Not far." She smiled faintly. "Somewhere they couldn't find me. I had to disappear to force them into the light." Every piece finally clicked into place. The letters, the will, every event that had made me believe I'd lost everything. All of it had been part of her plan. "You knew they'd accuse me," I whispered. "Yes," she replied. "I knew they would. I knew it would hurt, but sometimes people only find themselves after being torn from what they once believed was true." The heart monitor beeped softly, like a fragile rhythm keeping time. Outside, rain tapped against the window. "I won, Eleanor," I said quietly. "The world knows the truth. I'm your daughter." She squeezed my hand gently, her eyes glimmering like fading embers. "I'm sorry," she breathed. "Being quiet doesn't mean yielding. It's the only way to catch what we fear the most." I leaned closer, feeling her breath brush against my cheek. "I forgive you," I whispered. "Your hush taught me what a voice can do." She nodded faintly, a small smile forming as if she could finally rest. "I watched you in court that day," she murmured. "Your voice steady, your eyes unbowed. I saw in you who I once was, but stronger, freer. Thank you for speaking the words I never could." A soft breeze slipped through the window, carrying the sound of rain like threads of silk. I glanced around the tidy room, white chrysanthemums on the table, a steaming teacup, her old shawl folded neatly on the chair. Everything in order, as if she knew she only had a few mornings left to set her life right. She looked at me one last time, her gaze distant. "You know, there are things we carry a lifetime just to say at the end. I wanted to come back for you, but by then, my world was too loud. and yours was a world they built for you. If I pulled you into mine, they would have destroyed you like they did me. So I chose not to answer. I tried to speak, but her eyes closed, her breath fading. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the roof. The monitor kept its steady tone, stretching through the air. I bowed my head, resting my forehead on her hand, whispering, "I'm here, you're not alone." The light on the machine flickered once, then went still. The line stretched flat. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes, maybe hours. Outside, the sky turned to silver gray, streetlights casting long, hazy reflections on the window. Mason entered quietly, placing a hand on my shoulder. After a moment, I reached into my bag and took out the old envelope Eleanor had sent long ago, sealed with red wax. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded into quarters. Her familiar handwriting leaned slightly, strong but gentle. "When you read this, it means I'm gone. Don't let my silence become a wall between us. It was once my shelter, but for you, it must become a new beginning." I folded the paper, feeling as if I was holding her final warmth in my hands. In the hallway, a young nurse approached softly. "We'll be transferring Mrs. Whitmore to the cold room in a few minutes. Would you like to stay a little longer?" When it was me and Eleanor, the room filled with a tender white glow. I pulled the blanket up to her chest, adjusted her pillow, and looked around. On the table, the tea had gone cold, its lavender scent fading into the air. I placed the letter beside it, next to her old shawl. A strange peace settled over everything, as if all the noise of the world had stepped back. Sometimes the ending isn't a period, but a lingering breath, a message that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back, like the last light slipping through a sunset window. A year later, spring returned to Portland, the sky washed clean to a pale blue. From the 14th floor window of the building marked the Whitmore Foundation, I looked down at the moving crowd's small but persistent streams of life. Inside me, there was no longer the wind of the past, only calm and steady breath. On the wall, a bronze plaque gleamed under the morning light. "For every child who was told to stay quiet, you are heard now." Those words, I had written with my own tears. And now, they marked a beginning for children who had once been voiceless, overlooked, unseen like I once was. Downstairs, the main hall buzzed with laughter. It was the opening day of our first legal aid program for abused foster youth. Faces still young, some still frightened, but in their eyes glimmered something I had lost for years, the belief that they deserved to be heard. Mason walked into my office, carrying the smell of coffee and a new stack of folders. He smiled and set the cup on my desk. "You know," he said, "the Oregon Times called you the woman who broke the silence." I laughed softly. I never wanted fame. I don't want those kids to carry the same wounds I did. "But you did what no one else dared," he said. "You turned pain into a foundation. Eleanor would be proud." I looked out the window, where sunlight pierced through thin clouds and shimmered over the Willamette River. My phone buzzed a new email. The sender, Lillian Caldwell. I paused before opening it. "Sabrina? I'm sorry. If you can, please forgive me. I've lived months in silence, and now I understand how terrifying it is. I don't seek redemption, only that you know Eleanor saw through all of us long ago. I wish you peace." I finished reading, a strange feeling swelling inside, neither anger nor pity. Maybe in the end, everyone pays for their choices. That afternoon, Mason knocked on my door. "You have an interview with the local station at 5 p.m. They want to talk about expanding the foundation." 5 p.m. is too late," I said. "I want to see the kids first." "You always do," he replied with a small smile. "You never let anyone else speak for you, not even on TV." I smiled back. That's a promise I made to my mother. I stepped onto the terrace as the sun leaned westward. The city stretched before me, every window reflecting golden light like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Children's laughter drifted from a nearby park, mingling with the sound of seagulls overhead. That evening, I stopped by the foundation's residence hall. A girl about 13 ran up to hug me, her face smudged but radiant. "Miss Sabrina, guess what I got accepted into the art school today?" I smiled. "See? When you believe you deserve it, the world opens its doors." She nodded eagerly, then ran off, her laughter echoing down the hall. Watching her, warmth filled my chest. In those bright eyes, I saw myself the little girl once pushed away from the family table, who now stood firm, not because of pity, but through the strength of courage. Mason waited by the car. As I got in, he asked, "Do you feel at peace now?" "At peace," I said. "Not because everything's over, but because I no longer need to explain myself. The truth already has." In the distance, the foundation building stood, glowing under the sunset, the Whitmore Foundation sign shining like a lighthouse in the city. The last rays touched the river, scattering into thousands of shards of light, like broken glass pieced back together. And in that glow, I saw Eleanor, or maybe her memory, smiling. The city stretched ahead, warm and calm. The sunset brushed against my hair, and in that moment, I knew no longer a chain, but freedom. After everything, I finally understood that justice isn't an ending, it's the beginning of a new life, one no longer afraid to speak the truth. And whenever I look toward that sunset, I remember Eleanor's words, "Live strong enough that they have to watch." And maybe that's what I want to tell you today. If you've ever carried a quiet too long in your heart, tell me your story. Like, follow, and subscribe so we can continue this journey together, wherever you are in the world.